Historic lows. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation projects in 2 years' time, Lake Mead may be set to be at its shallowest levels in recorded history.
For more than 80 years, Lake Mead has stood as America's largest reservoir, a monument to human engineering and a lifeline for millions across the Southwest. But now, something is changing. Satellite images and ground surveys have confirmed what officials have quietly worried about for years. The water level is falling year after year. And what the lake is now exposing is frightening, literally, because as the water recedes, it isn't just dirt and rocks coming out. It is something far more disturbing, more than just sunken boats and abandoned towns. What's emerging now reveals a terrifying truth, not only about Lake Mead, but about the entire American Southwest. But what exactly is surfacing from the bottom of America's largest lake? How bad does it get from here? And who pays the price first? Las Vegas, Phoenix, or millions of ordinary families? Let's dive in. The lake that built the West. Lake Mead sits on the border between Nevada and Arizona, carved into desert canyons by the mighty Colorado River. When the Hoover Dam was finished in 1936, this lake didn't appear overnight. It took 6 long years for the water to slowly rise and fill the basin. At its fullest, Lake Mead held an astonishing 26 million acre-feet of water. That's enough amount to cover the entire state of Pennsylvania with 1 full foot of water. This wasn't just impressive, it was essential. Lake Mead supplies water to nearly 25 million people across Nevada, Arizona, and parts of Mexico. Las Vegas gets 90% of its water from this single source. Farms across the Southwest irrigate millions of acres of cropland using its water. Without Lake Mead, the modern American West simply couldn't exist. For decades, the system worked. Snowmelt from the Rocky Mountains fed the Colorado River. The river filled Lake Mead. The reservoir supplied cities and farms. It was a cycle that seemed unbreakable. But the cycle depended on one critical assumption: that enough water would always flow downstream. It was all going on according to the plan until very recently. The drought years. In 2000, something shifted. The Southwest entered what scientists initially called a drought. But as years passed, the term changed. Not a drought anymore. A mega-drought. The worst in 1,200 years. At first, the drop in water levels didn't seem serious. The lake fell just a few feet each year. Officials told the public not to worry, saying that rainy years would come back and the lake would refill. But those wet years never really arrived. And when rain finally did come, it wasn't enough to bring the water back. So, slowly, the lake kept shrinking. By 2010, the situation grew serious. Lake Mead had dropped to its lowest level since the 1960s. Engineers began worrying about intake pipes, the massive tubes that draw water from the lake into pipelines serving millions. If the water dropped too low, those pipes would suck air instead of water. So they built a new, deeper intake pipe. Problem solved. Except the water kept dropping. By 2015, Lake Mead reached levels not seen since it was first filled. White limestone bathtub rings appeared on canyon walls, stark markers showing where the waterline used to be. Each ring represented years of loss. Each ring climbed higher up the cliffs. As water levels fell, the lake began giving up its secrets. Things that had been submerged for decades suddenly appeared on the surface. In 2022, a barrel surfaced near Hemingway Harbor. When authorities investigated, they found human remains inside, a body that had been underwater since the 1980s. But bodies weren't the only things emerging. Sunken boats appeared, dozens of them. Vessels from the 1960s and 70s now sat exposed on dry sand. Then came the infrastructure. Water intake valves became visible. Pumping stations now stood high above the waterline. Concrete foundations of old structures appeared. Wide stretches of dry, cracked mud now covered areas where water once touched the canyon walls. The lake had fallen so much that boat marinas were left sitting on dry land, far from the water. Satellite images told the same story over time. Year by year, the deep blue of the lake faded. By 2022, much of it had vanished, replaced by dull brown earth and pale white mineral scars. The visual evidence was undeniable. Lake Mead wasn't just low, it was dying. The science behind the crisis. Climate researchers discovered something terrifying. The megadrought isn't a temporary weather pattern. It's a fundamental shift. Tree ring data shows that the Colorado River Basin has experienced droughts before, but none this severe or this long-lasting. The current megadrought has persisted for over 20 years. Temperature records reveal the problem. The Southwest is heating faster than almost anywhere else in the United States. Higher temperatures mean more evaporation. Lake Mead loses approximately 6 feet of water per year just from evaporation. Higher temperatures also mean less snowpack in the Rockies. The Colorado River's flow has decreased by approximately 20% since 2000. For a century, the system has been built on overestimation. States and cities were promised more water than the river could sustainably provide. The dead pool, water managers use a term that sounds like science fiction, but represents a very real nightmare. Dead pool. Dead pool is the level at which Lake Mead can no longer release water through the Hoover Dam. It's the point where the reservoir becomes functionally useless. Water still sits in the lake, but it can't flow downstream to cities and farms that depend on it. Dead pool's level is 895 feet above sea level. As of 2024, Lake Mead sits at approximately 1,045 feet. That sounds like a comfortable margin. But consider this. The reservoir has dropped over 170 feet since 2000. Major water shortages would force population declines, business closures, and economic collapse. California's agricultural industry, which produces a third of America's vegetables, would face catastrophic cutbacks. Farms would go dry. Food prices would skyrocket. Rural communities would disappear. And it's not just America. Mexico depends on Colorado River water guaranteed by an international treaty. As Lake Mead drops, Mexico receives less water, creating humanitarian and political crises. The footage from Lake Mead isn't just documenting a shrinking lake. It's documenting the early stages of the largest climate-driven migration in American history. The emergency plan. Faced with this crisis, officials have implemented emergency measures. In 2022, the federal government declared a Tier 2 shortage, triggering mandatory water cuts. Some propose radical solutions: pipeline projects, desalination plants, cloud seeding. Others suggest managed retreat, abandoning parts of the Southwest. The reality is simple. Lake Mead was built on assumptions that no longer hold true. The climate has changed. And no amount of engineering can create water that doesn't exist. The footage from Lake Mead shows more than a shrinking reservoir. It shows the future. Lake Mead serves as a warning. The white bathtub rings, the exposed infrastructure, the bodies and boats emerging from receding water. All of it tells the same story. Lake Mead was more than just a lake. It represented the idea that people could manage water in harsh desert land, making cities and farms possible where they otherwise wouldn't exist. The footage emerging from Lake Mead isn't just disturbing. It's a preview of what's coming. not just for Nevada or Arizona, but for every region where demand exceeds supply and climate change tips the balance past the breaking point. So, what do you think? Can we adapt in time, or are we watching the beginning of the end for the American Southwest? Let me know what you think about this in the comments below. If you liked this video, ensure you give it a thumbs up. Also, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, because we will be uploading more crazy stories like this one in the coming weeks. Until then, see ya.